In the final days of World War II, as Germany collapsed inward like a dying star, one man slipped quietly through the chaos, a man whose brilliance had earned him both admiration and fear. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt was not a soldier or a politician. He was an engineer, the kind whose mind operated on a frequency few could understand. He preferred silence over conversation, chalkboards over cigarettes, formulas over companionship. He was the kind of man who lived more comfortably among machines than among people. His colleagues remembered him as a ghost who walked the corridors of the underground weapons facility, tall, angular, spectacles reflecting the soft glow of fluorescent lights, muttering calculations under his breath, his eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. In April 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin and entire divisions crumbled, Reinhardt received a message marked with an inked eagle and a fading red stamp. What was written inside has never been recovered, but witnesses recalled seeing Reinhardt pale as he read it, fold it twice, and slip it into his coat. Hours later, he was seen hurrying out of his laboratory carrying a thick leather briefcase overflowing with documents. A guard claimed Reinhardt's hands shook as he signed out at the checkpoint. Another swore he heard Reinhardt whisper, "It must not fall into their hands," before disappearing into the smoke-filled night. The train station near the Harz Mountains was the last confirmed sighting. Reinhardt boarded a dusty, dimly lit car bound for the northern industrial regions, clutching the briefcase to his chest as if it contained something explosive. The conductor remembered him only because of his eyes, wild, frightened, yet determined, like a man who knew the world was collapsing and who was racing to outrun it. But the train reached its destination without him. Reinhardt's name never appeared in the arrival logs. He didn't disembark. He didn't contact family. He simply evaporated. The war ended weeks later, leaving ruins, ashes, and unanswered questions. And somewhere in the wreckage of Germany's collapse, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, along with whatever secrets he carried, vanished without a trace. For decades, historians debated whether he escaped, was taken, or died in the chaos. But none of them imagined the truth would remain hidden beneath concrete and steel for nearly 8 decades, not until 2023. Deep in the Harz Mountains, where mist coils like restless spirits between broken treetops and forgotten warpaths, an abandoned munitions factory has rotted since 1945. Its brick walls sag, its metal beams twisted from years of exposure. Locals avoid it, calling it cursed territory. They whisper that strange noises echo at night from the ruins, metal clanging, gears grinding, like forgotten machinery still trying to breathe. But on a rainy afternoon in 2023, 5 urban explorers ignored the warnings and crossed the rusted fence, cameras strapped to their chests, flashlights trembling in their hands. They stepped into a world frozen in the final hours of the war. Inside the factory, dust danced in the weak light, like ash refusing to settle. Machines lay toppled in heaps, half consumed by rust. Gas masks, scattered across the floor, stared up with empty glass eyes. One explorer kicked aside a rusted tool chest and found a clipboard still holding a paper dated April 1945, the ink blurred but legible enough to feel like a whisper from the past. They pushed deeper into the maze of hallways until they reached the main assembly room, a cavernous space where the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Something about the silence was wrong, too still, too deliberate. Then one of them noticed a fractured seam in the concrete floor, running in a perfect line from wall to wall, like something beneath had pressed upward. They followed it to a collapsed section of floor, where debris formed a jagged crater. One explorer crouched and brushed aside chunks of stone, and his fingers hit metal, not rusted machinery, not broken pipes. Something smooth, cold, and intentionally crafted. They cleared more rubble. A shape began to emerge. A steel door, reinforced, welded from the inside, untouched by time. This wasn't part of the main factory, one whispered, breath hitching. This was hidden. Panic mingled with curiosity as they uncovered a small section of a faded symbol. An eagle stamped over crossed lightning bolts, the insignia of a classified wartime division erased from official records. What was this door sealing away? Who had put it here? And why had it remained untouched for 78 years? As they pried at the edges, dust thickened, the earth trembled slightly beneath their feet, and a cold draft flowed from the gap like something long trapped was exhaling for the first time. The explorers stood face to face with the discovery that had no business being there, a steel monolith swallowed by darkness and dust. Behind the rusted machinery, hulking presses toppled like metal skeletons, gears fused with decades of decay. This door sat impossibly pristine, untouched by rust or graffiti, unsullied by time. In a building where every inch was scarred, burned, or etched by vandals, the door gleamed with a cold, metallic resolve, as if it had been preserved by an unseen hand. One of the explorers stepped forward, running his fingers over the metal surface. It was smooth, too smooth. Not even a fingerprint or scratch disturbed it. The welds along the edges were thick, precise, like the work of someone who had sealed it not for protection but for containment. The more they stared, the more the air changed. Even the dust seemed to slow, hanging in the beam of their flashlights in lazy suspension, as if time itself hesitated to touch what lay beyond. "Why isn't there any graffiti?" someone asked, voice trembling. Every wall in the factory was carved with names, dates, crude drawings, warnings in spray paint. But the door stood untouched except for a single symbol, etched at eye level, a triangle enclosing 3 interconnected circles, faint but deliberate. None of them recognized it. The explorer with the camera leaned closer. "The hinges are on the inside," he whispered. This door was welded shut from within. Whoever closed it didn't want anyone to open it again. The others exchanged nervous glances. The silence that followed hummed like static. They pressed their ears to the cold metal and listened. No movement, no ticking of machines, just a low, unnatural quiet. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A small chunk of concrete crumbled away near the bottom of the door, revealing a sliver of darkness behind it. A gust of frigid air slipped through, a breath colder than the mountain wind outside. "There's a void behind this," one whispered. "A chamber." They stepped back, hearts pounding, senses screaming in equal parts, fear and fascination. This wasn't a storage room or bomb shelter. This was something else entirely, something that had survived war, fire, and time. A hidden room sealed by a man desperate to protect whatever was inside. A room untouched for 78 years, waiting for someone foolish or brave enough to open the door he welded shut. And the explorers had just found it. When the sealed door finally groaned open, releasing a slow exhale of cold, stale air, the explorers were hit with a smell like dust, iron, and something faintly chemical, something preserved. Their flashlights pierced the darkness to reveal a cramped chamber, its walls lined with steel shelves untouched by rust. Everything inside was in immaculate condition, as if whoever last stood there had stepped out only minutes before. But the center of the room drew their eyes instantly. A heavy metal crate, its surface scarred by age, yet still locked tight with a rusted latch. Stamped in black ink along the top was one word: Reinhardt. The air thickened. This wasn't just a storage box. It was a time capsule. A warning. Hands shaking, one explorer pried the crate open. Inside lay notebooks, 4 of them bound in worn leather, their corners softened by time. Each was stamped with the same name, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt. They lifted the top notebook and flipped it open. The first pages were filled with dense handwriting, neat, precise, written in a hurried scrawl of equations, notes, and observations. But the deeper they went, the stranger the entries became. Pages covered in sketches of unfamiliar machinery, spirals connected to coils, magnetic rings surrounding a cylindrical device. Circuits drawn with impossible complexity. Arrows pointing to German text that translated to "energy flow uncertain, must reduce harmonic disruption, dangerous resonance." Another page showed a malformed sketch labeled Prototype B, with a warning written in bold, "Unstable catastrophic field exposure." The journal entries shifted from scientific to frantic. Lines crossed out violently. Words repeated. Time running out. They don't understand. If completed, impossible to control. The final entry stopped them cold. The handwriting was jagged, smeared, as if written in panic. They are coming. Must hide the device. This room must remain sealed until safe hands discover truth. If not, destroy everything. Beneath that frantic message lay a sketch, an incomplete blueprint of something that looked like a generator, wrapped in coils that spiraled inward like a vortex. Yet the technology looked decades, no, generations ahead of its time. The explorers' breaths quickened. These weren't random notes. This was a secret war project, one buried so deep the world never knew it existed. Klaus Reinhardt hadn't vanished. He had hidden himself and his invention. And whatever he feared in 1945 might still exist. The explorers weren't prepared for what came next. Beneath the notebooks lay a stack of film reels, their metal canisters stamped with Reich insignia and dates from early 1945. The reels crackled with age as they lifted them out, dust falling like gray snow. Back in their makeshift camp outside the factory, they threaded the film through an old projector, one of them kept in the van for abandoned theater shoots. When the first reel flickered to life, it cast ghostly images across the concrete wall, grainy, jittering, but unmistakably real. Archival military footage, a command center, officers hunched over papers, maps of Europe's collapsing front lines. Then, as the camera panned, a figure stepped into frame, tall, narrow-faced, wire-framed glasses reflecting the harsh overhead light. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt. The footage crackled as the narrator, a stiff, authoritative German voice, described Project Nachtfall, Operation Nightfall, a classified initiative overseen directly by High Command, its purpose redacted beneath heavy black strokes. Reinhardt stood beside a prototype device, a cylindrical machine encased in coils and plated steel, its surface humming faintly as technicians adjusted knobs and levers. Even in the flickering light of the projector, the machine looked wrong, alien, out of place in the 1940 seconds. Officers in black uniforms watched from the background, their expressions a mixture of awe and unease. The narrator continued. Dr. Reinhardt's advancements represent possibilities once deemed impossible. If successful, the Reich will possess a weapon unlike any conceived by modern science. Another reel showed Reinhardt presenting diagrams to a room of commanders, pointing to equations that seemed to twist the air around them. One officer scoffed, shaking his head, but another leaned forward with a chilling smile, as if imagining whole cities collapsing under invisible power. Then the tone changed. The final reel was darker, shakier, filmed in secret. A man whispered into a hidden camera, sweat glistening on his brow. Reinhardt's machine, it works, but it should not. It is unnatural, dangerous. It bends fields that should never be touched. He paused, swallowing hard. If they deploy this weapon, it will not just end the war, it will end something far greater. The footage cut abruptly, the reel spinning out into white light. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. Operation Nightfall wasn't a myth, it was real. And Reinhardt's invention wasn't just ahead of its time, it was beyond it. By late January 1945, Germany was a fractured labyrinth of retreating columns and bombed-out rail lines. Yet one train, Train 7437, was given absolute priority. According to a memo tucked into Reinhardt's crate, it was to carry critical research materials and prototypes from his underground lab to a fortified installation in the Harz Mountains. Reinhardt boarded in the early morning cold, a heavy coat wrapped around him and the same leather briefcase clutched to his chest. Witnesses described him as pale, exhausted, but intensely focused. A guard remembered him whispering, "Just a little longer, just until it's safe." The train rumbled out of the station under heavy guard, every car locked and sealed. Snow drifted across the tracks as it wound deeper into the forested mountains. The atmosphere was suffocating, soldiers whispering about rumors, about a weapon that could turn the sky inside out. According to a surviving conductor's testimony, Reinhardt stayed in his cabin, emerging only once to check the cargo compartment where his prototypes were stored. He had insisted the crates remain with him, refusing to let them out of his sight. But then something strange happened. The train arrived at Station Eisenwald, a tiny outpost used primarily for coal shipments. The logs show the train halted at 2113. Guards disembarked, stretched their legs, and waited for Reinhardt to step out so the transport could proceed to the final checkpoint. He didn't. His cabin was empty, his briefcase gone. The window unlocked, frost melting in uneven streaks along the glass. Panic spread among the officers. They searched the train, then the surrounding forest, shouting his name into the cold night. Nothing, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue, yet all cargo remained untouched. Every crate sealed, every prototype accounted for except one. The smallest crate, labeled Gerät K12, was missing. When the train reached the next station, the logs recorded the anomaly. Passenger, Dr. K. Reinhardt not present. Cargo item K12 unaccounted for. The next note, written in trembling handwriting, chilled the explorers to the bone when they found it in Reinhardt's files. Recommend termination of search. If Dr. Reinhardt does not wish to be found, it is safer for all involved. And from that moment onward, the official narrative began to twist. Reports were buried, records sealed, witnesses reassigned or silenced. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt had vanished into the snow-covered night, taking the most dangerous invention of the war with him. The world believed he died in the chaos. But the explorers now understood. Someone had sealed that door for a reason. And Reinhardt's disappearance wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something far more unsettling. As the explorers turned more pages of Reinhardt's logbook, the tone of the entries shifted from controlled scientific notation to something darker, frantic strokes, uneven lines, and ink smeared by trembling hands. The early entries were organized, methodical, almost serene. But then came the paranoia. "They do not understand what this machine can do," one page read, the words nearly gouging through the paper. "If it falls into the wrong hands, it will end not just armies, not just cities. Time itself will fracture." Another entry, dated only 2 weeks before his disappearance, described strange occurrences in his lab. Electromagnetic distortion increasing, instruments malfunctioning, lights flicker during tests, personnel uneasy, rumors spreading. They whisper that the device hums even when powered off. Reinhardt's handwriting grew erratic, letters slanting upward as though he were writing while pacing, the ink pressure uneven. High command demands acceleration. They threaten removal. They threaten imprisonment. They do not see the danger, they only see power. One page was torn, but fragments remained. "I no longer trust my assistants. They report to others. I hear them outside the lab at night. Footsteps. Whispers. Watching." Another, "I cannot sleep. Every sound feels like a threat. They want the device operational. They do not care what it might unleash." The most chilling passage appeared near the end, scribbled across the page in frantic loops. "If they reach me, if they force activation, I must destroy everything. The prototype, the plans, myself, if necessary. Better to die with my work than allow it to become a weapon of unimaginable ruin." Immediately beneath it, Reinhardt reconsidered. "But perhaps I can hide it. There are places beneath the factory. Old tunnels sealed during the First War. Locations unknown to most. If I can reach them in time." The final entry consisted of only 3 desperate sentences. "The train is compromised. They are coming sooner than expected. I must vanish before they arrive." After that, nothing. The logbook ended abruptly, as if his pen had been ripped from his hand. The explorers stared at the final lines, understanding perhaps for the first time that Reinhardt had not been a mad scientist. He had been a man fighting to keep something monstrous from entering the world. A man who had sacrificed everything to bury his invention where no one would ever find it, or so he had hoped. The chamber that held Reinhardt's logbook and the preserved notebooks seemed too small, too neat, to be the full extent of his hiding place. Something about the pristine condition of the room felt intentional, as if it was meant to distract from what lay beyond. And they were right. One explorer noticed faint markings on the far wall, scratches forming a half-erased arrow. When they pushed aside a rusted shelving unit, concrete dust cascaded down, revealing a narrow, jagged opening. A tunnel, black, silent, carved unevenly like someone had clawed their way through rock in desperation. The air spilling from it was colder than the sealed chambers, carrying a metallic tang that hinted at machinery long dead. They squeezed into the tunnel one by one, their flashlights cutting pale beams through the dark. The ground sloped downward sharply, forcing them to brace against the walls. 10 meters in, the roof partially collapsed, blocking most of the passage with rubble. But beneath the debris, something gleamed, metal. The explorers cleared stones with shaking hands until the shape emerged, cylindrical casings stacked neatly beside a workbench frozen in time. Tools lay scattered in a half-finished arrangement: wrenches, soldering irons, coils of copper wire, and blueprints pinned to the wall by rusted nails. But the blueprints, they were unlike anything they had ever seen. One fragment depicted a weapon-like structure, not a gun, not a bomb, something stranger. A curved housing surrounding a central core, coils spiraling inward with surgical precision. Annotations covered every available margin. Resonance limit exceeded. Field instability at 63% power. Containment breach risk high. Another sheet showed a disassembled version of Gerät K-12, the missing prototype. The pieces matched the metal fragments strewn along the tunnel floor. Thick casings bent from immense internal pressure, scorched markings near the seams. "This wasn't an explosion," one explorer whispered. "It looks like it collapsed inward, like it imploded." The deeper they went, the more unnatural it became. The walls bore melted streaks as if exposed to extreme heat. A section of the tunnel bent outward, warped like softened metal frozen mid-twist. Something powerful, something unpredictable had been tested here, and Reinhardt had hidden it far from the main facility, deep in a tunnel no one knew existed. The explorers stood there, flashlights trembling, realizing the truth. Reinhardt didn't hide his invention out of madness. He hid it because something inside this tunnel, something forged by his own hands, had already shown him what it was capable of. The explorers sifted through Reinhardt's notebooks with growing disbelief, their fingers trembling as they turned each brittle page. But it was the very last notebook, the smallest, thinnest one, that held the most devastating revelation. Its leather cover was stiff, edges frayed, as though Reinhardt had handled it obsessively, carrying it everywhere. When they opened it, a folded sheet of parchment slid out and drifted to the tunnel floor like a dead leaf. One explorer bent down and carefully lifted it. The paper crackled with age, corners yellowed, but the ink faded, though it was still pulsed with a kind of urgency. Across the top, in Reinhardt's precise handwriting, were the words, "Project Dämmerung, Project Twilight." They unfolded the blueprint slowly, afraid it might crumble in their hands. What they revealed was something that should not have existed in 1945 or even in 2023. The diagram depicted a massive device shaped like a segmented ring, its inner structure lined with magnetic coils, emitters, and something that resembled a rotating containment core. It looked like an electromagnetic field generator, one far more advanced than anything documented before the 21st century. Lines of handwritten notes surrounded the illustration. Resonant field harmonics. Space-time stress points. Wave collapse, threshold beyond predicted. These weren't crude or theoretical sketches. They were full engineering blueprints, mapped with terrifying precision. One explorer squinted at a section labeled Feldkonvergenz. "Field convergence," he whispered. "But this looks like an attempt to bend magnetic fields inward, to compress them." Another diagram detailed a spherical containment chamber surrounded by layered coils, notes scribbled along the edges. If rotation exceeds 300 rad, see catastrophic implosion risk. Unsafe to test indoors. Danger to biological tissue within 15 meters. One explorer stepped back, shaking his head. This is impossible. This level of electromagnetic theory didn't exist until decades later. But Reinhardt had drawn it, refined it, obsessed over it during a war defined by tanks, rifles, and crude rockets. Another page showed calculations referencing distortions of space, something not fully explored until long after the war. The final annotation at the bottom of the blueprint sent a chill crawling up every spine. Prototype unstable. Must be hidden until the world is ready, if it ever will be. The blueprint shouldn't have existed, neither should the technology. And now, staring at the impossible machine Reinhardt tried to bury, the explorers understood the truth. The world never knew about Project Twilight because Klaus Reinhardt ensured it would remain buried. But someone or something had forced him into that tunnel to hide it. And the tunnel wasn't done revealing its secrets. The tunnel pressed deeper into the earth, narrowing until the explorers had to crouch, their flashlights slicing through the darkness in thin, shaky beams. The air grew colder, heavier, as if carrying the weight of what happened there. Then, without warning, the ground dipped, sending one explorer tumbling forward. His scream echoed off the stone walls as rocks clattered around him. When the others scrambled to his side, their beams caught something pale protruding beneath twisted metal beams. At first, they thought it was a piece of shattered casing, another scrap of Reinhardt's collapsed prototype. But as the dust settled, the shape took form. A ribcage, fingers curled into a claw-like grip, a jawbone visible beneath broken stone, a human skeleton pinned under fallen support beams, frozen in a position of desperate struggle. One explorer gagged. Another whispered, "No, no way." They approached slowly, flashlights trembling as they illuminated the remains. Near the skeletal hand lay a leather strap, cracked, dry, but unmistakable, attached to a battered briefcase. The same type Reinhardt had been seen clutching as he boarded the train. They lifted it gently. The initials, KR, were faintly embossed on the worn leather surface. Another explorer unearthed a pair of round spectacles crushed beneath debris. One lens cracked. The same style Reinhardt had worn in archival footage. The realization washed over them like ice water. This wasn't just a skeleton. This was Klaus Reinhardt, the man who vanished in 1945, the man entire divisions searched for, had died alone in a tunnel, crushed beneath beams he himself may have damaged to hide his creation. As they examined the collapsed area, the truth became terrifyingly clear. The support beams weren't destroyed by an explosion. They were twisted inward, bent in unnatural shapes, like metal pulled toward a violent center. It mirrored the imploded fragments of the prototype. Whatever happened here wasn't sabotage, it was the result of Reinhardt's own device. And the blast-proof vault just beyond the skeleton, its thick, reinforced door, warped like soft clay, told an even darker story. Reinhardt had tried to hide the final version of Project Twilight behind that vault, and something had pushed back. The explorers stood over his remains, silent, realizing they were the first people in 78 years to lay eyes on the man whose genius and desperation had nearly changed the world. And somewhere beyond that twisted vault door, his invention was still waiting. The blast-proof vault groaned as the explorers forced its warped door open, the steel bending reluctantly like something resisting release. Inside, the chamber was smaller than they expected, narrow, claustrophobic, its walls lined with shelves filled not with weapons, but with documents. Dozens of envelopes lay stacked neatly, sealed with brittle wax, each addressed in Reinhardt's shaky handwriting. Some bore dates only days before his disappearance. Others were undated, as though he had written them in a panic, unsure of how much time he had left. The explorers handled the letters with care. Many were written in a frantic scrawl, ink blotting in places where Reinhardt's hand must have trembled. One letter addressed to those who find this read, "I have seen what the machine is capable of. It does not create energy. It tears it from the fabric around it. Space bends, air shakes, Light distorts. It is not meant for war. Another letter, clearly older, described the first time the device reached partial activation. There was a humming low at first, then rising until the metal sang. The coils glowed. My instruments spiked beyond measurable limits. The air rippled. When I shut it down, the room was inverted. Tools pulled inward. My assistant's hair stood as if electrified. We fled. A more personal letter, addressed simply to whomever I once trusted, revealed the true depth of his fear. High Command sees only advantage. They demand weaponization. They do not understand this device bends the laws nature has given us. I cannot allow them to build more. Reinhardt confessed in another letter that he had intentionally sabotaged the manufacturing schematics by altering key calculations ratios, field strengths, rotational velocity. If they attempt replication, the device will fail catastrophically. Better it destroy itself than destroy the world. His horror crescendoed in a final, unfinished letter. I made this for knowledge, not for death. Yet all they desire is domination. They would sacrifice millions to test it. Even the Allies, if they learned of it, would race to seize what they cannot comprehend. There is no side I can trust. The last lines he ever wrote scrawled unevenly, like the hand of a dying man read. The world is not ready for this. If you find it, bury it deeper. Destroy it if you must. But for God's sake, do not let them see the truth I have seen. The explorers set the letters down slowly, a quiet dread settling over them. Reinhardt hadn't hidden his machine out of cowardice. He had hidden it because it was the only way to save the world from what he had created. The deeper they delved into the vault, the more their stomachs knotted. At the bottom of a locked drawer, its lock melted into a twisted knot, they found Reinhardt's final lab notes. Pages scorched, edges brittle, equations half obliterated by heat. But what remained told a story as chilling as the skeleton in the tunnel. The first entry began calmly enough. Prototype C undergoing calibration. Field stabilizers adjusted. Harmonic resonance approaching predicted threshold. But the following page shifted dramatically. Words slanted, urgent. Containment breach risk increasing. Magnetic oscillations unstable. Must reduce coil output by 30%. Then scribbled beneath in larger handwriting, commanders demand full test. They do not grasp consequences. The next entry, marked only by a date the 13th of February 1945, documented the catastrophe. Activation sequence initiated at 14:02. Coil rotation surpassed safe threshold. Field distortion audible screeching like metal tearing itself apart. Lights flickered. Gravity in chamber, inconsistent. Another note. Assistant Alvarez pulled toward core. Force vector unknown. Had to shut system manually. Then came the line that froze the explorers. The core collapsed inward implosion, not explosion. The walls bent toward the device. Temperature spike immeasurable. A rough sketch showed the aftermath, a drawn outline of the tunnel warped inward, matching the twisted beams they had found earlier. More notes followed, increasingly frantic. Sirens triggered. Entire facility lost power. Electrical surge traveled through wiring, frying circuits. Sparks ignited fuel lines. Fire spread to secondary labs. Emergency teams attempted evacuation. Many did not escape. High Command blames sabotage. They do not believe the machine failed on its own. The final page was barely legible. Words scorched and smeared by perspiration or tears. But the meaning was unmistakable. Both sides will come for this. If it cannot be contained, they will kill me for the knowledge. If they cannot kill me, they will capture me, interrogate me, force me to build it again. And then, the final line, written in heavy, desperate strokes, I cannot allow either side to possess this power. The machine must die, and so must I. The explorers stared at the burned pages, realizing the truth. Reinhardt hadn't simply vanished, he had tried to bury his invention and himself beneath the earth. But the machine, whatever remained of it, was still somewhere beyond that warped vault door, and they had just opened the path to it. What the explorers didn't know, at least not yet, was that the ruins they were navigating had not been forgotten by history. After the war ended, as Germany lay fractured between occupying forces, Allied investigators had swarmed across abandoned laboratories, factories, and testing facilities in search of anything that could hint at advanced weaponry. And in late 1945, a special reconnaissance unit stumbled across the same munitions factory the explorers now stood inside. The records, buried deep inside classified archives and later discovered in Reinhardt's vault, told the story in clinical, unnerving detail. Facility compromised, one report stated. Structural damage consistent with internal blast or field collapse. Possible electromagnetic anomaly. Another document, stamped with an intelligence seal and heavily redacted, noted, "Key personnel missing, including Dr. Klaus Reinhardt. Evidence suggests advanced research conducted on-site. Recommend immediate quarantine." Photographs, grainy, black and white, edges eaten by time, showed soldiers standing in the very assembly room where the explorers had found the welded door. The same fractured seam ran across the floor, the same collapsed machinery scattered like metallic bones. Yet the most chilling image was a shot of the sealed steel door itself, intact and untouched, with fresh weld marks sealing it from the outside. That's when the cover-up began. A field note from a British intelligence officer explained the decision succinctly. "We cannot risk public or political knowledge of the device described in recovered documents. Technology appears decades ahead of current understanding. Potential consequences unknown." Another memo, written by an American liaison, added, "Speculative theories include electromagnetic field compression and gravitational distortion. If enemy forces pursued this research, they may attempt to replicate. Recommend suppression." The factory was officially listed as unusable due to structural instability and sealed under layers of concrete. Guards were stationed for 2 years before the site was declared inert, but whispers persisted. Locals recalled trucks entering the mountains at night. They remembered the sound of welding torches echoing across the valley, and then nothing. The site vanished from maps. Unit numbers were reassigned. Witnesses were transferred or sworn to silence under threat of espionage charges. Reinhardt's disappearance became a footnote, one of many missing wartime figures assumed dead. But the internal memos carried a different tone, one that bled unease through every sentence. Subject: Reinhardt may still be alive. Last known sighting occurred near rail line. Briefcase missing. Intelligence warns possible survival. Those words lingered like a warning. They never found him. They never found the missing prototype. They simply buried the secret and hoped history would never uncover it. But history had just been pried open by 5 unprepared explorers, and Reinhardt's truth, once sealed beneath steel, was rising back into the light. When the explorers finally escaped the suffocating tunnels, clutching Reinhardt's notebooks and trembling from the weight of their discovery, they had no idea how seismic the impact would be. Within weeks, after failing to keep their find secret, the documents reached the hands of modern scientists, specialists in theoretical physics, electromagnetic research, and experimental propulsion systems. The reaction was immediate and electric. At a private research facility, experts pored over Reinhardt's equations with stunned disbelief. "These calculations," one physicist whispered, running a finger along a line of intricate notations, "they predate our understanding of field harmonics by half a century." Another scientist, specializing in experimental propulsion, compared Reinhardt's hand-drawn diagrams to modern prototypes. "He was attempting field compression," she murmured. "What we're only now testing with high-energy coils, he theorized it in the 1940 seconds. Reinhardt's notes on resonance collapse matched contemporary concerns in electromagnetic propulsion experiments. The risk of harmonic overload, spatial distortion, oscillation feedback loops. But the chilling part wasn't what he had gotten right, it was what he'd predicted. Pages described localized field displacement, gravitational irregularities, and inward-pulling resonance collapse, phenomena that modern labs had observed only in the last decade. using equipment Reinhardt could not possibly have had access to. He was decades ahead, another researcher whispered, tapping the blueprint labeled Project Dämmerung. This is beyond theoretical. This is borderline quantum manipulation. The lab's chief physicist paced the floor, hands clasped behind his back, as he reread Reinhardt's final warnings. He understood the danger, he said softly. He wasn't trying to build a weapon. He was trying to stop a catastrophe. But the most disturbing realization emerged when the team used modern imaging to reconstruct the device. The simulations showed a machine capable of generating a localized electromagnetic vortex, something strong enough to warp metal, distort gravity, and implode structures inward. Exactly what the explorers had witnessed in the tunnel, exactly what had killed Reinhardt, and exactly what the world had been shielded from for 78 years. As the analysis deepened, a new question rose, quiet, terrifying. If Reinhardt predicted these effects long before the science existed, what else did he foresee? What truths lay within the pages scientists had not yet deciphered? And why did one final annotation scrawled beside a diagram of the vortex chamber read, "This is only the beginning"? As the world digested the rediscovery of Klaus Reinhardt's work, speculation churned like a storm. Journalists, historians, physicists, conspiracy theorists, everyone wanted an answer. Why had Reinhardt vanished so completely? Why had a man with brilliance, blazing decades ahead of his time, chosen to bury himself and his invention beneath stone and steel? One camp believed Reinhardt had died exactly where he intended, sacrificing himself to protect a world too fragile, too violent, too unprepared for the power he had inadvertently unlocked. They pointed to the crushed skeleton in the tunnel, the warped beams, and the melted vault door as evidence of a deliberate act. He sealed himself in, they argued. He knew that once the machine existed, someone, some government, some army would use it. He chose death over complicity. Others believed the opposite, that Reinhardt never meant to die at all, that he'd retreated underground to hide his work, planning to destroy the prototype before the war swallowed him. They theorized he'd been trapped in the tunnel during a catastrophic implosion of his own collapsed device, crushed beneath his creation in a moment of brutal irony. But another theory, whispered with fear, suggested Reinhardt had not been alone in those final moments. Letters hinted at spies, informants, soldiers watching him. His notes spoke of footsteps outside his door, of orders to accelerate testing, of threats. The third possibility incubated in darker corners. He was silenced. Historians noted that High Command had grown desperate in the final months of the war, capable of eliminating anyone who withheld what could be the Reich's last hope. Allied memos from 1945 suggested they feared Reinhardt's device might fall into enemy hands. Both sides wanted him. Either side might have killed him. Yet the truth remained shrouded in the collapsed earth of the Harz Mountains. Only one artifact offered the faintest glimpse into Reinhardt's final thoughts. While cataloging the hidden room connected to the welded door before it had collapsed completely, one explorer noticed faint marks etched into the concrete near the base of the wall. Not graffiti, not symbols, words. Simple, desperate words written in fading pencil, clinging to the last dry patch of concrete after decades of moisture and decay. He brushed away dust, his breath catching as the letters took shape. The future must not know this. 6 words that cut deeper than any blueprint, any letter, any journal entry. 6 words that revealed everything. Reinhardt wasn't running from death. He was running from the future he believed his invention would unleash. A future he feared more than war. A future he feared more than himself. And in the end, he did the only thing he could. He vanished, and hoped the world would never find him. But the future always finds what the past tries to bury. This video was intense. But this video on the right-hand side is even more insane.